Hey there, I'm Mr. Terry, high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. All right, we're back with another alternate history hub video. And it looks like this one could be continuing on a previous one where he talked about a way that the Germans could have won World War II. So I'm excited to see what he's got here. By the way, if you missed the live stream of the first episode of my History of Trivia show called History Showdown, I'm going to link it down below. You're definitely going to want to check that out. It was a lot of fun. This first episode had Mr. Beat, the cynical historian, and Drawn of History competing against each other. And check it out, and you'll see who the winner was. All right, this video, though, is going to be linked down below. Please support Alternate History Hub, and let's get started.
World War II and alternate history go together like peanut butter and jelly. If PB&J caused rampant internet debates, maybe it does. I don't know. All I know is that in the last World War II video, I opened Pandora's box. There was like 1,000 comments in the first hour alone. I was pleasantly surprised at how civil and constructive the conversation was.
I mean, World War II is the most common and favorite thing that people, hey, hey, look at this guy. All right, Cody. Drew did, okay, so Drew did one too. I don't know who McJibbin is. Is he a history guy? I don't know, but there's mine. He put that up there. But it is, and you know, I could back it up with a lot of the videos and stuff that I've covered. People love World War II. I mean, for a lot of people that are into history, World War II was their gateway. It was that first thing that get them interested in. But you can't study history without, you know, like then knowing the stuff from before that, right? Because it's like there's no like first domino in history, and you want to go back and you go back and you go back. But my question, why I paused originally, was about alternate history, you know, things. Put aside like what your favorite history subject is. What do you think is maybe the most interesting what if or alternate history scenario that you think, you know, that you like to learn about or you think is really important? Let me know down below.
It even went beyond the realms of the channel itself. So before getting into the next part of the timeline, I thought I would dig through some of Jimmy's thoughts and share a few of them, you know, to clear the air.
Jimmy?
If you don't care about any clarification or a Q&A, skip to this part in the video. As for anyone that had some
so is this a
comments or
follow-up?
wanted clarification, well, let's begin.
Okay.
I mean, yeah.
Is this
Ultimately,
a
that's what
follow-up
these
video
videos
to
tend
that
to
one?
end up as. We only have so much real history to go off of, so the further you diverge from our original timeline, it just kind of gets progressively harder.
Yeah,
You really
for
just
sure.
start adding fiction on top of more fiction.
Yeah.
So then you need to dig.
Because it's not, you know, it's not like a straight line timeline. When you do an alternate history, it's more like a tree. You create a new branch, and that branch has branches, and then it just, you know, it gets even more difficult. And obviously, the further back you get in history, the more branches there are going to be when you start to break away.
Dig even deeper in the real history to justify the scenario. It's an endless loop. You know what? That's true. Very true. Every so often I run into...
Okay. I think I'm going to read some of these, I guess, if you don't want to fast forward or whatever, but I'm interested to hear, I guess, what some of these things are he's responding to. I do have to might substitute some words and stuff just because of censorship policies or whatever, but one minor correction is that Mustache Man, okay, I'm glad he said that, was not the one who gave the halt order. Okay, so he is going back to the Dunkirk video. Okay, basically saying that if they had gone harder during the retreat of the British soldiers, again, it's a Dunkirk where, again, so many thousands and thousands were able to evacuate from essentially mainland Europe back to England. But if they had really just like gone all in and destroyed that force, that it could have like devastated a future effort of the mainland again. So would there have been another D-Day? I can't remember exactly what I said, but I still hypothesize that could be something. But it definitely, I don't know, probably would have made the idea even harder, which was already something they thought would be really hard. Okay, it was given by 4th Commander Gunther von Kluge and General Oberst, oh man, I'm so bad at the German, Gerd von Rundstedt, and then approved by Mustache Man a day later. Too much of the German military actions are put on the Mustache Man, especially actions done early on in the war. It really wasn't until the invasion of the USSR that he really started to override his generals and dictate the actions of the war. Okay. And again, I defer a lot of World War II stuff to a lot of other people because, like I said, it's the thing that people love talking about the most, and people will invest their whole historical energy into World War II. And I'm not that guy. I love to learn about lots and lots of different things. So I'll defer to a lot of you guys on that about what Mustache Man's influences were on the military itself and how that changed over time. But I definitely want to know, like, what you guys that know more than me, about that.
You know what? That's true. Very true. Every so often, I run into topics that could easily be a 10-hour documentary.
Yeah.
And for the sake of time, some simplifications
That's like me when I teach
and
lessons,
omissions
man,
have to be made.
in school.
Again, another good example.
Okay. I should know, prior to early 1943 IRL, the US's nuclear program was on its own. It was the merger of the UK program, which was further ahead tech-wise, but way behind in resources and scope, which sped things up. And this was initiated by the UK. They came to America for help with their top-secret project. America told them they already had their own. They got merged. If this doesn't happen, America's nuclear program is set back at least a year until 1946, possibly even 1947. The UK provided a ton of research and help, and Canada helped with resource issues and served as middleman. Okay, so he posted a reply to that, and we probably want to see that because I'm sure he posted it for a good reason. Probably gotten it even earlier if this scenario was a pacified Churchill would have full send any and all tech and research to the last bastion of freedom, and tech upgrade could have very well been prevented, or could have well prevented Pearl Harbor. I have to make that connection. As a better radar equipped base, and after seeing how Europe got folded, a more twitchy base would have had no Sunday breaks, and first radar contacts coming from the west being instant red alert would have devastated the surprise attack and possibly launched a counterattack. They could have crunched blank blank. Okay, so yeah, we're getting into now the multiple branches off of the original branch there. But yeah, a little bit about earlier when they were talking about, I guess, the nuclear program too. Yeah, you did start to get a merger of some of the things, of some of the ideas. And remember, some of them were like defectors that coming out of Germany. And one thing I know they got out of working with the British is also an idea of where the Germans were at, because they had a good kind of finger on the pulse of what the German program was, because again, defectors and people that were coming to Britain were able to give some of that information.
These videos are all about pacing, and if you want to play YouTube's game, pacing is everything.
Oh, yeah.
These videos kind of live and die depending on if people are still watching. So it's good to not just grind everything to a halt, all to explain the logistics.
Are people
of the
still
project,
watching at the
or
end?
how
That's
Britain
what
and
YouTube
Canada
loves.
could have helped accelerate it. Yeah, there would have been slightly better clarification
Or people clearing
on the Manhattan
or
Project, but there's
leaving
a lot of
videos.
information to get to. When you think about it, contextualization kind of has no endpoint. I'd rather make a 5-part timeline if I see the support for it, rather than a 1-hour series on the Manhattan Project, all to make a point.
See, I hope people aren't giving him crap about his videos and, okay, you missed out on this thing, you missed that, what about this context? Like, okay, like, you can talk about that and that can be fun, but like, don't make it accusatory. Like, that's not what this is. I think Cody does a fantastic job. So many videos I think follow like certain types of logic, and I think he does a good job, especially under the constraints of what it means to be, like a YouTuber. I think does a fantastic job. I totally got his back.
A lot of complaints in my older videos was how I would talk 90% about the history and 10% about the scenario. So for the sake of the scenario, sometimes sacrifices had to be made. All right.
If it's 90%, I guess I could agree with that. I love the history. I love the history part of it, because if you don't fully understand the context, your tree branches you're going to be creating about the alternate history are going to be all screwed up. But I guess, if people want more of the hypothesis, and that's what people want to respond to, and they go to, I think, an alternate history hub video, they want to interact with it. They come in and want to compare what they think with what he thinks. I think this type of video format is great as far as like interaction goes. And I'm sure his engagement is super high if you look at views and comments and that kind of stuff, and that's great, and that's why the format is so good.
Criticism. We're going to separate this by the British comments, Soviets, and nuking Berlin.
All right, I'm not reading all those.
You got me. I would like to make the First Amendment to the video. The peace treaty was actually too soft. As a few of you pointed out, Germany would also want at least a few of its World War I era colonies in Africa.
Okay, so, I shoot, if I had known going into this, I would have watched that whole video again, but I'll just rely on what I kind of remember. It wasn't that long ago. But yeah, that there was a treaty offered to the British, and definitely would have wanted a lot of concessions. So German colonies, I could see that being a thing, especially because German colonies were taken from Germany after World War I.
God. In hindsight, we can look at Britain's resilience, but at the time of the deal in 1940, a huge portion of the cabinet and populace just wanted peace. And since its official entry in the war in
Especially with
1939, what did Britain actually manage to accomplish?
The alternate
Watch as
Dunkirk.
Poland and Scandinavia were torn apart. They got utterly wiped out in France and Belgium. Strongbrew makes a good case regarding Germany's attitude to Britain here.
That's
On
all.
top
Okay.
of that,
You
it's
can
worth
read that
noting
yourself.
that Germany gave British POWs the VIP treatment while committing numerous war crimes against the French, Polish, and especially Russians. Also, keep in mind that in the scenario, I did say Germany would gain access to the Suez, but they wouldn't own it. With the rising tensions in India and utter helplessness against the Reich, what could Britain achieve by refusing this deal?
Okay, so Britain, who's in control, Suez. I mean, there was foreign investors and stuff, but Britain dominating that region, especially after World War One. Yeah, saying that deal, they would not have allowed like the Germans to like use it or take control of it. I mean, just use it. That benefits everybody. That's where the British can tax. That's why people have wanted the Suez Canal. Why the Suez Canal was there in the first place. First, the British wanted to be able to link more easily to their colonies in Asia, specifically with India. Also, let other people use it too, because you can charge them money.
How would such a refusal affect civil order and troop morale? As for the alternate invasion in 1945, do you really believe that Mustache Man would call it a day and just live out his days in peace? What about Africa and the Middle East? The German war machine would be unstoppable and would have a lot to gain from just finishing the job.
More imperial conquest in Germany, is that kind of what he was saying there? I mean, the Lebensraum idea is going to be a lot more, I don't know, invested in Europe for sure. But I guess after that, like after the fall of the Soviet Union and movement to people and settling that whole Eastern Europe, I guess.
All right, so Operation Barbarossa.
By the way, props to Cody he truly looks at all these comments and look at that. Can be hard for a YouTuber, look at that, especially I'm sure because he gets so many of actually bros that he's reading it, and he's very active in that social studies and social settings, I should say.
A lot of you disagreed on Germany winning due to logistics, and yeah, I get it. It does seem unrealistic. I try to explain why the logistics of Germany would be slightly better and why the Soviets would be significantly worse, but I get it. All right, so while a lot of the actions of these states did
if they can still, if Lend-Lease still isn't going to work and the United States can't get stuff to the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union used such a high percentage of their stuff came from Lend-Lease coming over from the United States. If they could somehow block that and actually blockade that. But we also know we saw that happen in World War One, where Germany tried to do that, try to blockade shipments of war materials into Europe for World War One, that it probably could have brought the Americans into the war, the war with Europe initially, not, with Pearl Harbor and then by extension, then Europe.
Down to the orders of its dictators, things were also a lot more complicated than that. I don't think the Soviet Union, which fumbled against Finland in 1939, would be too dramatically transformed if it was given a 300 days heads up. I don't really think this front line could be substantially reinforced against these panzer divisions and a Luftwaffe on steroids. Say its front line was reinforced. That kind of just...
The thing, I will never again underestimate the Russians after learning about them in war. I mean, not that I think I ever underestimated them, but when you look at how much they've gone through historically there and what they've been willing to do, I won't sell them short.
As logistical strain on the Soviets, who pour in men and resources on a wider front further from its industrial base. Yeah. Not to mention that in our timeline, the Soviets received multiple warnings from both their own spies and British intelligence of the impending attack, and they were in the process of rearming. Remember, the invasion in this alternate scenario would happen a month sooner. And it's not a sudden full-out victory either.
A month?
It could take the Germans 2 years before they break the Soviets.
Well, one thing I have learned is timing in the invasion of Russia is so critical because of, things like weather. It's hard to go any earlier than they were because you've also got to deal with the climate. They're still coming out of spring. You can't just be all right, it's not snowing anymore, let's go and invade. you've got the ground itself and we got panzer divisions, you have to have the ground be very dry. It can't be wet. Otherwise they can get stuck. You are very limited in that window, but you also can't wait very long, of course, because then the next winter settles in.
You know, just like an estimation, this isn't science. Besides, preparation is a much smaller factor here. We're really talking about the lack or reduced amount of lend-lease that breaks the Russian bear.
Okay.
That's the main thing.
Yeah, that
With
would
Britain
be
unable to
that would
be
be
the Atlantic
significant.
middleman. American aid is kind of too little, too late. And as a cherry on top, I want to highlight this comment from one of the modders of the ultra-realistic mod for Hearts of Iron 4. An alternate history video bringing up Hearts of Iron 4. Groundbreaking, I know. I didn't really specify this in
I don't know. Hearts of Iron people might be the most attuned to outcomes, alternate history outcomes, because that's literally what the game is doing your own outcomes of historical events.
the video. I guess I should have, but there's no way the Germans go to Siberia, or hell, even the Ural Mountains. They wouldn't need to. The Archangelsk
We could stop at
line
the
he
Urals for
describes
sure.
is where the Germans could safely park the bus. And all of that would be used to level up the Kriegsmarine for potentially Sea Lion in 45. 20% of the Soviet territory contained 80%.
Operation Sea Lion is invasion of Britain. So it was a failure because, the Blitz wasn't effective enough in the German eyes to actually pave the way for an invasion. So but he's saying there'd be one in 45. That's, I guess, possible. I mean, that's a lot of time though between like Dunkirk and this 1945 sea invasion, or Operation Sea Lion by sea. That's 5 years of regrouping
Of its population, and more importantly, its resources. What the Soviets beyond the Urals decide to do is irrelevant. Most likely, they would just collapse
Russia's
into a
fallen.
bunch of warring states scrambling for control, like in the Chernobyl and Lenin videos.
If they get to Siberia, Russia's fallen.
All right.
If they
okay,
get
so
that
this
far.
was the main reason
If you cross
I did
the
whole
Urals,
Q&A.
it's
A lot
over.
of people had a big issue with the fact I said an American bomber could fly all the way over German-controlled airspace and drop a nuke on Berlin.
I think I
while
said
they were
that.
at war with Britain.
I feel like I said
and
that.
Yeah, you're right. Kind of. You see,
I feel like I said that. They're not just getting it free. Just everybody in Germany, all their defenses are like, hey, look, like that must be nothing.
as impressive as the Manhattan Project was, Uncle Sam threw even more cash at the B-29 Super Fortress. It sounds crazy, but yeah,
Thing's a
less
beast.
money was spent to split the atom than to make a better plane.
Dude,
and I
that's
mean, it's
so
a really
nuts.
good plane. This bad boy was Cold War era tech invented decades earlier.
Yeah, that thing's a
you know what?
beast.
I agree. Nuking Berlin does sound a little far-fetched.
I think
We're
I
talking
remember
about
saying
the heart
that.
of the Reich here. So let's go ahead and have the nukes drop on Hamburg and Cologne instead. They're within better range, they're not as well protected, and we're gonna just factor that into
Okay.
part 2 of this timeline going forward.
Okay, yeah, let's not get freaked out because you could put up arguments for sure about Hamburg and Cologne and stuff like that. But let's not for the sake of this, okay?
Yeah, we're
Okay,
retconning,
actually,
why
bros.
not? A few of you also expressed doubt at America randomly nuking Germany, but remember that in the scenario, Pearl Harbor still happens. Germany still declares war on the US.
Okay.
So when Sea Lion begins, they were already at war for a few years. That was probably the first time I did a actually Q&A since I had like 1,000 subscribers. I'm going back to my roots. Going through the comments and discussions
Q&As
is
are
always
fun.
a lot of fun. As
I like
nice as
doing it.
real history is, I like fake history better. And man, we're deep into alternate history territory.
Fake
A
history.
full 5 years after the point of divergence in the most well-documented and discussed era in history. So let's have some fun with it.
Okay,
Hey, guess what?
what's up?
Desk mats.
Oh, that's awesome!
That's right.
Oh, that's cooler than mine. That's way cooler than the one I have. Selling it in my merch store. This one's way cooler. Oh, sick. Dude, Christmas present to myself? Oh my god, that is amazing. Wait, I need to look at the details more. We got like the Aztecs over there. We got, yeah, I see what's going on. It's North America. We got Florida there in the middle. Got some dolphins. We got some pirates. We got some indigenous folks. Dude, that thing's amazing. Does he have more than one?
Elevate your gaming or workstation with Alternate History Hub desk mats, where history and creativity collide. These desk mats are perfect for anyone that likes stupid little figures inspired by history.
Dude,
so the nice people at
doesn't?
Epic Desk reached out to me for a collaboration. They specialize in high-end, premium desk mats that they promised would knock my socks off. I gotta be honest, I was skeptical. But after they sent me
the
this one
socks
with my
gone?
America design, honestly, I couldn't be happier.
Honestly, my
man,
socks have
it
fallen
actually
off.
is premium. Crafted using a blend of polyester and spandex, it's built for comfort and durability.
I need one. I actually don't.
This
I just
bad
have a
boy
mouse
comes in
pad.
36.5 by 15.75 inches of smoothness. Yeah, you heard me. So because I like this one so much, I came up with a
we
total
got
of 4
plushies.
designs that you can now choose from.
Oh my gosh, I want all of them. Oh my gosh, which ones? Oh man, I don't know which one I would want. They're all awesome. We got Europe in the top right. Bottom right, what's going on with bottom right? It's kind of all over, huh? Okay, bottom left is just all the famous people. Oh my gosh, I can't decide.
You could put a map of North America on your desk. Stare into the Codyverse.
That's a sick,
Join the Jimmy Gang alongside
wallpaper,
a bunch
too.
of other figures. Or maybe you just want to watch the world burn in the flames of World War II. Hell, you can
I
get
bet a lot of you
multiple,
will want that
grabbing
one.
a neat 15% Black Friday discount on your whole order. I will say though, get them while they're hot.
But it's
'cause
after
these
Black
designs
Friday.
are a one-time thing. They're never coming back. These mats will only be available through January 1st. There are no restocks. Once they're gone, they're gone. You've seen stuff like this before. You're on the internet. What often happens in alternate history scenarios is there's a single
looking into it.
idea or point of divergence that's
Right.
investigated
The tree
as a thought
branch.
experiment. But due to popular demand, this will now become an entire timeline. The thing is now, with each step we take beyond the POD, things become more complicated, but much more interesting. For example, there are many theories out there about what would have happened if Spain joined the Axis in World War II. Taken at face value, this is an interesting scenario that ultimately leads to an even quicker Axis defeat. But
Has he done a video that I've reacted to about that, about thinking about it? Because if they were going to join the war, especially with the way the Civil War in Spain ended, it would have been on the Axis side. I mean, it wouldn't have hurt. By the way, who do you think would have done better, Spain or the way Italy did it? The Italy that we know of in history, or Spain? Who do you think would have been better?
in this Dunkirk disaster timeline, Franco joining comes along with a lot of other changes. Notably, that change happened off-screen. So before we return
would've had a lot
to
of
the
experience.
altered Cologne nuked 1945, let's catch up on the rest of the globe. How did
India.
Britain's exit from the war and fall of the Soviets in 43 affect the world? Ever since the
South America and
1848
Africa.
revolutions, large waves of German immigrants constantly made their way to South America, a land which resembled their homeland, where they could
Yeah, a
raise
lot did
cattle,
anyways.
climb mountains, and drink beer under the warm sun. By the time World War II came around, those communities had deep roots in countries like Brazil, Argentina, and Chile, affecting the decision-making of the states themselves. That being said, while even in our timeline a few hundred of them flirted with the idea of Axis alignment, the Atlantic and
Yeah, so the economies of Latin America were also very dependent on a lot of these industrial export countries. So you couldn't have just really sat it out necessarily because there would be some pressure, and you could potentially alienate really important trade allies because, again, a lot of resource dependency there.
more importantly, the metaphorical American gun to their heads would easily dissuade them of such notions, leaving things, as for now, relatively the same in our timeline. Then there's Africa. With Britain out of the war, the North and
already
East African
colonized, too.
campaigns just don't happen. In fact, with nobody to support them, Free France never gets established. A quick but very important aside. In the previous video, I said that peace would be obtained with or without Churchill. That goes without question. But Churchill's stubbornness
Okay.
does force
Really?
him to accept the
Oh,
terms,
'cause he was forced.
with the glimmer of hope that he could one day reverse the fate of Europe. This means that Charles de Gaulle and other resistance fighters are given refuge and sent over to America. But as a whole, Vichy France retains all African colonies, as Africa waits
still
for
be
Germany
puppets.
to light the candle in 45.
As puppets, right? Okay.
Unlike the Great War, the Second War
You guys disagree with anything so far? I mean, I don't know, maybe minor things, but
World War really lived up to its name. This conflict encompassed the entire planet. Hell, there was even
Cold War
fighting
wouldn't
over
have happened
Antarctica.
almost.
This
Well,
was a time when
here's an interesting thing. So if US doesn't join, is the Cold War then just between Germany and the United States rather than the United States and Soviet Union? I don't know. I don't think they'd be as dialogically opposed.
everyone had to pick a side, especially in Europe. And sure, you look at a map and see there were several neutral states, but in reality, each of them was leaning one side or another. On the pro-Allies camp, we had Turkey, Portugal, and Ireland. Over on the pro-Axis camp, you got the SSS of Sweden, Switzerland, and Spain. The only country that does not change its stance on this timeline is Ireland. Everyone else hops on the Reich bandwagon.
But he
Sweden
already
was
said
already
Ireland.
surrounded by Axis
Oh, yeah,
members, supplied Germany with over half of their iron, and allowed its troops to move through its territory on their way to Russia. Mustache Man really didn't bother integrating the Swedes into his coalition, since they were already giving him everything he wanted. Plus, he feared that
Right.
their direct involvement would make them an easy target for British bombing.
I mean, it also makes sense from a geographic perspective why something like Norway would probably be even more important, especially because you have a front in the Atlantic, a defensive front there with Norway, where Sweden's kind of, blocked in the middle there.
But in a timeline where they witness an expanded Finland, triumphant Germany, and pacified
Expanded
Britain,
Whoa,
Sweden
hold
would
on. Finland goes all the way to the Urals in this scenario, not just like defends themselves. Is that what he's saying?
be very easy to
Finnish
persuade.
empire
These same
begins.
arguments would be very persuasive for the Swiss, but even more so than Sweden, they served Germany's interests far better as a neutral country,
Yeah,
which was
true.
already towing the line. From the European perspective,
That's fair.
after the fall of Moscow, the war was already over. In our timeline, many countries rushed to change their stance in 1944, when the writing was on the wall.
Yeah.
Same goes here.
People
For
wanna
example,
be on the winning
just look at
side,
how
I guess.
Franco changed his tune, and then how the West treated Franco in the name of combating communism.
They fought
Speaking of
against
the
him.
Spanish dictator, him joining the Axis would fundamentally
They fought against
alter the
Franco.
timeline. It's weird to think that Sweden was more helpful and cooperative to the Axis than Spain ever was in our timeline, but it turns out despite being bailed out during the Civil War, Franco was incredibly reluctant to return the favor. After the fall of France, he met with Mustache Man and started to haggle. His demands included vast amounts of food and fuel, which would restore the Spanish economy. French Morocco, Cameroon, and part
Yeah, I was gonna say, with the Spanish, so the Spanish Civil War was devastating, totally devastating. Like the idea that I guess they could just be done with it and then just like, all right, we can fully help you as like a full helpful ally. That might be a little bit difficult. I did ask earlier, what do you think it would have been in comparison to say like Italy? Still thinking about that.
parts of Algiers. He even asked for mainland French territories, more specifically its Basque and Catalan lands. Finally, he declared that he would
won't like that.
officially join the Axis only after those demands were met. A few years later, Germany once again tried to persuade him via threats and promises, just so
Hey,
they
we
could
helped
move
you with the
troops
Civil War.
across Spain in order to attack Gibraltar.
Remember that Germany put a lot of resources into the Spanish Civil War. They helped a lot. I think Germany would definitely be expecting something in return. But would they go to like, if they didn't like go invade it or something? I don't know about that, but it definitely wouldn't want to be an enemy if you're Spain in this timeline where like Germany's dominating. Yeah, I don't think you want to be Spain and be not playing along.
But he refused. Yeah, you would need a serious POD that changes Franco's mind. But luckily, that's
I don't
exactly
know.
what we have here. In this alternate timeline,
Not so sure.
in order to get his captured soldiers back, Churchill is forced to cede Gibraltar to Spain and Malta to Italy, as outlined in the last video, effectively
Okay.
losing British power projection in the Western Mediterranean. This on Germany's part
really
would
call
be
that power
a
projection.
very generous gift, buying the allegiance of both dictators. Furthermore, Franco was terrified of the British, but with them being pacified,
really need to buy
they become a
Italy's,
non-issue.
though?
Perhaps there's the sweetener of French Morocco to seal the deal, as well as substantial economic aid, which would only increase in the years after the fall of the Soviet Union. An Axis Spain and ever-growing German success would send direct messages to Portugal's own dictator, Antonio Salazar. Like Franco, he was a shrewd man who did everything in his power to stay neutral, reaping the profit from both sides. In this alternate world, Portugal would probably be forced to break its treaty with Britain and join the Axis.
That's what I was wondering. Yeah, now that I was thinking about it with them, because they were allied, aligned, sort of, in World War I similarly. So, but it may also be a big deal depending on what Spain does too. So.
To prevent a violent takeover, around the time Greece or Leningrad fell. In our world, Portugal allowed the Allies to use the Azores in 1943 for crucial bases.
That is an important place.
That allowance is mirrored, granting the U-boats a base of operations deep into the Atlantic, long before the big fight in 1945 begins. So, in summary, the Axis is joined by Spain in 1940, Sweden in 1942, and Portugal in 1943. With a combined population.
Portugal is a little bit less reluctant, but first two make sense, more sense, but I'm not opposed to it.
Of 41.6 million people, and the GDP equivalent of Australia or Argentina at the time. None of them had a particularly powerful military, but their manpower, projection, and most of all Navy would certainly come in handy
geographic
for the war to come. Oh yeah, there's
geography,
also one
very
other neutral country I haven't mentioned. A
lot of coastline.
The Republic of Turkey. The old man of Europe was revolutionized by the young
allied with Germany once.
And now, a few years after the death of Kemal Ataturk, Turkey made the decision to remain neutral, as his right-hand man and successor continued with the reforms. Due to its strategic position, both sides made
so important. Holy cow. Linking of the Black Sea, I mean... Look what the British tried to do in World War I and failed spectacularly at the beginning to be able to do. But choke point, I mean, it's why Constantinople, Istanbul, it's why it even exists. It's one of the most important geographic locations on the planet.
Offers. But the Turkish government was concerned by both the Soviet aggression and Italian dreams of a
they have a history,
Rome. That being
Russia.
said, the country had a zealous movement, believing in pan-Turkism, hoping to unite with other Turkish-speaking people, particularly those in the Caucasus. In this alternate timeline, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, Germany is now able to project power and offer a unique win-win solution. You see, the Soviet Republic...
You guys buying into that? The whole Turkification of, I guess, of Western Asia that way? I'm trying to think about it because, I mean, first off, that was problematic before in, say, like the Ottoman Empire, because they built themselves very much that way. But we know the Turkish nationalism is very, very strong. But with the Soviet Union, with the Soviet Union, I guess, collapsing in this scenario too, there's a lot of like Turkic origin lands, all those Stan countries, for example, the Soviet Union eventually is going to control. But does that mean they're like up for grabs for the Turks to like move into? I mean, maybe there's a lot of territory though that they'd have to deal with.
Of Azerbaijan worked around the clock to provide the Union with 70% of its oil.
So much oil.
And it was staunchly against the German invaders. They even mobilized 700,000 soldiers to the war effort, or a fifth of its population. German occupational forces were already stretched thin. In return for ceding the territory to Turkey, they might not only join the Axis, but ensure the oil shipments never stop. Insert blatantly obvious reference to Dune here. Speaking of oil, the more I research this topic, the more I'm stunned by how important this resource really was. Which, no duh, but still. For his birthday in 1942,
it's like the only thing that makes Stalingrad make sense. I remember in this situation, they take over those oil-rich regions, so maybe less dependent now, Germany would have been.
Man even got a cake shaped like Baku. Ideology aside, so many wars are mainly driven to get key resources, and there is rarely a point in time when such a valuable resource is spread in such a uneven way. The closest second I can even come up with is how unfairly coal was distributed during the Industrial Revolution. Today, oil is produced all over the place. But in 1940,
showed a map similar to that
the technology was still developing, you only had a few key sites. Iran, Iraq, Azerbaijan, Venezuela, Mexico, Indonesia, and East Texas. Of the 4 locations in the Eastern Hemisphere, 3 were right next to each other, and Germany was planning to push forward from the Caucasus all the way into Iran and Iraq. Between 1948 and 1958, major oil fields would be discovered in Canada, Libya, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Kazakhstan, China, and the North Sea. That is partially why the UK and Soviets went crazy in our timeline when they discovered that Iran had Axis sympathies, and they held anti-British protests. BP was drilling the hell out of Persia, giving Iran only 16% of the profits.
Okay, so glad he said this. By the way, this is also going to pave the way for the whole Iran history from World War II to today. Well, especially through the Iranian Revolution in the late 70s. But yeah, like Iran was exploited essentially by foreign investors, where these deals to let these foreign investors come in and bring in the technology to be able to refine and drill all this oil and stuff. Definitely not going back to the Iranian people, which of course is going to lead to the removal of the Shah, who again was more pro-West. So anyway, glad they're bringing this in. But the British can't really back them anymore.
The threat of that going away was enough for them to launch an invasion alongside the Soviet Union. Just 2 months after Barbarossa, Iran fell within 6 days and became the first nation to be split in 2 by the Allies.
See, here's one of the things I was thinking about Churchill. Now, first off, we're assuming that with the deal that they're going to make Germany, that Churchill will stay, I guess, in power, but would probably definitely be building up and would not just like be out of everything there, but maybe find other places that they could influence. And this could be one of them, especially for how economically important it was for Britain to be able to have their control and their resources in Iran. Because probably the United States probably couldn't, pick it up enough. Also, are there going to be blockades and stuff like that? Would the United States be able to just freely trade their oil like to Britain?
With North Iran going to the Soviets and the South going to Britain. Yes, this actually happened. A few months earlier, in 1941, the exact same thing played out in Iraq, which supplied Britain with 40% of its oil. Just 2 years after obtaining limited independence, the young nation suffered a coup by a nationalist group, which overthrew the pro-British government in the hope of attaining full freedom. The British response was swift, and the rebels were put down within a month. Now, in this alternate timeline, both of these events still occur, even with the German demand that the empire become more isolationist. Churchill could not afford to lose the Persian corridor, but at the same time, Mustache Man was too busy with Operation Barbarossa to do anything about it. After the fall of the Soviets, Iran's northern half would be overrun by the British, setting up the groundwork for a massive theater of the war, which the Germans would open up in '45.
See, isn't Germany also getting really spread out by this point too, or spread thin, I should say? It's not going to be easy if they actually want to take Iran, which I think I'm on line with Cody right now. All right, Pacific, we haven't talked about that at all.
Some crucial allegiances being changed, the regions not mentioned in the previous video pretty much remain the same, but the Pacific
Germany could trade with oil with Japan.
That changes the most, at least until it all pops off with Operation Sea Lion and the nukes. Remember all those oil fields?
Well, actually, no.
Notice how only one of them
not if the US
was
get involved.
East of Iran. Not to mention, the Dutch East Indies produced 1/15 of the amount of barrels East Texas did.
Yeah.
That strategic situation meant that after the 1941 oil embargo, if Japan wanted to keep their empire, they had no other choice but to attack it. And
that's what that's what the Japanese are going to say too in their defense.
Everything else that stood in its path. Looking back, it really is insane at how much the West underestimated Japan. Japan still attacks Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, Guam, Wake Island.
Don't tell that to the Russians, though. Russo-Japanese War.
And the Dutch Indies. Now, you would think that a peaced-out Britain would put up a better fight against the Japanese.
Doesn't matter.
But the truth is, they underestimated them just as much as America did.
Wouldn't matter anyways.
Moreover, non-aggression treaty or not, Britain would still fear German aggression, and was busy operating in the Middle East. The first wave would proceed the same way as it did in our timeline. But starting in '42, Lord Mountbatten would receive a lot more support in his operations in British Burma. It's an easy bar to beat, considering the British barely sent 2 infantry divisions in our timeline. In our world, the Casablanca Conference outlines several key issues for the Allies. Roosevelt wanted to build up China and aid it as much as possible, but Churchill put those plans on hold, prioritizing
They're not communists.
action in Europe. Since in this alternate timeline those actions were a far-fetched dream, Chinese assistance would be much more amplified.
Do you think the United States would have feared communism as much if the Soviet Union again got totally wrecked permanently by Germany?
Slowing down Japanese progress on every frontier. On the other hand, the looming German threat also means that Japan is treated more as a side quest, if anything, not worth wasting precious nukes on. Since the Soviet Union falls apart, those nearly worthless provinces in the Far East might be taken over by the Japanese, while the Allies commit their entire strength in defending off Germany. No Soviets and no concluded operations in Europe means no Operation Downfall, and no end in sight for the conflict in China. The Japanese have a much harder time in China and Burma, but America and the Commonwealth are just too busy to land a kill shot,
Really?
buying the Japanese more precious time.
Because this is saying if Pearl Harbor happened, though, right? Oh, I gotta make sure I'm following the logic here, but I wouldn't have thought like it would change anything in the Pacific.
Now let's circle back and examine the buffed up Reich and its opening moves.
Okay.
In our timeline, the Axis never had a shot, but given a few extra years of preparation and experience, on top of a defeated Soviet Union, plus a few more extra Axis members, and what you end up with is a very even fight. The Allies have spent the last few years preparing for the inevitable attack, but like the Japanese in our timeline, they didn't anticipate Mustache Man breaking the 5-year treaty 3 months before it expired, and attacking in May 1945.
It kind of depends what the goals are going to be, though, between the two alliances. Like, if the United States and Britain get to still do like a D-Day and something with the Soviet Union already gone, like, I don't know. You'd have to see a real tangible threat to the United States from Germany, and I haven't really seen that yet, other than their friend Britain, them really losing a lot of their influence. But I don't know. I mean, still comes back to Japan, I think, inevitably. And if Germany is going to back up Japan, then yeah, then probably that's the scenario.
The attack comes in just a month after the passing of FDR, giving Truman a similar test that Churchill faced in 1940.
By the way, still get a nuke or no?
Iron, Spanish tungsten, oil from Baku, and grain from Ukraine.
Nukes are going to
Albert
change
Speer
everything.
is able to fulfill many of the ambitious promises to the Reich. One of those was the 20,000 aircraft, including many new models like the jet-propelled Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulf-Ta 152,
Oh, gosh.
who now made bombing runs
Swear
over
word
the
plane?
English Channel. U-boats suddenly descend upon transatlantic shipping from the Azores, while the upgraded Kriegsmarine drill in preparation for Operation Sea Lion. Instead of being shipped away on Operation Paperclip, Werner von Braun's V-2 rockets are launched from occupied Holland in the hundreds. While London was getting battered, the Empire
So he
would be
doesn't
struck
leave?
on 3
He doesn't
other
leave?
crucial fronts. It's too early for the millions of Wehrmacht soldiers to board the ships, which is why 200,000 men with an ample supply and armada of tanks strike British Egypt alongside Italians and Spaniards. Lifting off from Crete and Anatolia, the Luftwaffe descend upon Cairo and Cyprus, smashing every port and airbase they could find. Malta is stripped away from the British, and within a month,
Not Malta.
the entire Mediterranean is dominated by the Italian Regia Marina. A month or two later, coastal Egypt is in Axis hands, which now prepare to rendezvous with the Second African Theater. So, stepping back, a lot of people like to trash talk Italy's military performance,
Yeah.
but they might not have heard their actions or luck in the often forgotten East African campaign, unless you play.
Man,
Hearts
they're
of
just
Iron.
like, I don't know. Is he negating the British military too much? That if they make this deal with Britain, that they'll just essentially not be a force anymore?
Then you've probably heard of it. forgotten East African campaign. Unless you play Hearts of Iron 4, then you've probably heard of it. Mussolini envisioned the capture of Egypt and Sudan, connecting his colonial empire. At first, they reaped some success in Somaliland, despite heavy
Germany would want it.
casualties. In January 1941, the British initiated
Italy wasn't
Operation
getting
Camilla,
Egypt.
broadcasting false information, tipping the Italians off that they were moving troops and preparing to attack Somaliland. Instead, they were preparing to attack Eritrea by land. But in a stroke of accident,
And that more than anything though was about Red Sea trade access more than anything. I mean, the imperialism, yes, and all that. Also understand that Italy failed to take Ethiopia back in the 1800s as well. So there's a little bit of lasting, I don't know, memories of that.
accidental brilliance or luck, the Italians decided to let the presumed British land first, redeploying coincidentally to where the British were actually coming from. This resulted in the stunning and decisive success of the Italian army, which pushed the Commonwealth all the way back to Cairo.
All right.
Yeah, that was a joke. Italy was crushed. Ethiopia was liberated, resulting in the first real victory
I was gonna
for the
say.
Allies and the destruction of Mussolini's colonial dreams. And while
Right.
we're at it, the Portuguese colonial empire too. So here's the thing: even in a timeline
even
where
talk
the
about
Axis
that
powers were
Portuguese
buffed
empire
up,
at that time.
against a more prepared Allied force backed up by American troops, Italy still crumbles, losing their holdings in East Africa. More importantly, this is the first taste of combat in 5 years for the Commonwealth soldiers, and a good opportunity to practice their combined operations with the Yankees, something which will be very important in the theater that everyone had their eyes on.
Oh, wait.
So-
Wait, Operation Desert Storm.
Theater that everyone had their eyes on.
A different, okay. Operation Desert Storm, Axis cover featuring Desert Fox. Okay, so another just oil thing.
So far, we have one swift
Saddam
victory
Hussein
for the
this time,
Axis
though.
in Egypt and another swift defeat in Ethiopia. But that draw would be broken in the Middle East, where both sides could pour tanks, airplanes, and troops in order to contest for the abundant
True.
oil
Could be a
resources there. The
bloodbath
Axis held
there.
Syria, Turkey, and the Caucasus, while the Allies could rely on the safe Indian Ocean to deliver their troops via the Persian Gulf. The wide open floodplains, jagged mountains, and deserts of the region would become the key battleground and the true trial by fire for the Allies, who would be met by none other than the Desert Fox himself.
Irwin.
Only this time, he would enjoy copious amounts of fuel, allowing him to outmaneuver his enemies with ease.
All right, where the Rommel simps at? I feel like I haven't heard from you guys in a while. The like big time Erwin Rommel like apologists. Where y'all been, or have I just not been paying attention?
The other key
This is your
advantage
time to
for the
shine.
Axis here is the fact that for once they were actually liberating occupied people who despised British rule. On the eve of World War II, America had only 439 tanks.
That's not how it ends up. I mean, that's not what ends up happening anywhere in the Middle East, though. They don't want anybody there. They may not like the one group, but they don't like you either. That's usually the thing. They don't just flip. That's what ends up happening. We look at like in Afghanistan, where it's like, yeah, come on in, help us defeat the Soviet Union. Okay, now leave, please. Oh, you're not? Okay, here's some terrorist organizations. That's what ends up happening.
And despite a ramped up industry, island hopping and naval battles with the Japanese would do little to prepare the ground force for this campaign. That being said, the Allies had powerful tools in their kits as well. Logistics were easier, technology, especially in the air, was superior, and while the Germans had better officers,
Look how more
the
global
Allies
this
cracked
war is
the
becoming.
Enigma code. But it would take a lot of time for experience to be obtained. Time and a lot of dead bodies. As the German war machine plowed through the desert sands, western Iraq and all of Palestine would fall to the Blitzkrieg, while advances in Iran would be more difficult. The battles in Africa, the Middle East, and all over the English Channel would be intense. And on each front, the Axis would have the upper hand. But then, in August 1945, Truman drops the nukes over Cologne and Hamburg, killing over 1 million people in an instant.
I was wondering when he was going to bring in that aspect, because I don't think the atomic bomb timeline changes at all with this. And yeah, game changer, right? Okay, good. I'm glad he's bringing this up. Oh, the video's almost over. It's like I don't know how much he can explain in like a minute and a half, though, because I think this needs a lot of discussion for an alternate scenario. I really do. How would Germany survive this? Because this is talking about, how Germany could have won.
After years of stockpiling aircraft and bombs, both sides unleash all their fury across the English Channel. Spitfires and Mustangs versus Messerschmitts
What about
in
nukes?
aerial combat,
What about
which would
nukes?
pave the way for a naval invasion from one side or the other. Considering this is an overconfident mustache man we're talking about, the Germans would likely throw everything and the kitchen sink at the Allies.
Even the
but for
kitchen
every
sink?
plane the Luftwaffe takes down, America ships in 2 more. But Uncle Sam wasn't all muscle, he had brains, and they achieved their task at Los Alamos. Amidst the maelstrom, the B-29 Superfortress was able to nuke both Cologne and Hamburg, inflicting a major wound on Germany while simultaneously turning it even more fanatical.
Yeah, but what can you do about it? Would it just be the same thing with happened to Japan? There's plenty of fanaticism there. All right, he's about to end though, so I'm wondering again. I originally paused because I was wondering if you guys agree with the targets of Hamburg and Cologne. I mean, not agree that like from a moral standpoint. I'm just saying, like, would those have been the cities that the U.S. would have chosen?
Over 500,000 people are vaporized, raising the stakes. In the midst of the confusion, a major operation is conducted by the Allies, who seize all Portuguese territory in Africa. More importantly, a
Why?
Pearl Harbor
Why
level attack
Portuguese?
is initiated against the Azores, risking American aircraft carriers in return for eliminating the valuable submarine base. Action in Africa and Iraq convinces Truman and Churchill that the key to the war is hitting Germany's underbelly, namely its Italian and Spanish allies. If they could pull off a D-Day operation in Spanish Morocco, then maybe, just maybe, they could win the war. But to answer that question, we will need a third and final chapter to this epic Dunkirk timeline.
Please do another video.
Thank you once again for all your support, especially to my Patreon members. This is Cody of Alternate History Hub.
Final thoughts. All right. Well, another great job from Cody over here, continuing on kind of with the logic that he was trying to follow, or at least the hypothesis he was trying to follow about Germany, you know, having more success in the war. I could definitely tell, I guess, or at least I had hoped that there would be another part because I think the atomic bomb and kind of the thought behind it is and needs to be a big talking point for any outcome of World War II. So I'll definitely be looking out for the next one. And again, if you didn't see episode 1 of History Showdown, I'm going to link it down below. Check it out, play along, and we'll see y'all next time.